Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy City Council on Monday, 30th of May 2022. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawa people as the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of tonight's Council meeting. Joining me here in Council Chambers is Alderman Peter Ball, Alderman Jan Dunsby, Deputy Mayor Stephen King, General Manager Tony McMullen, Alderman Gay Richardson, Alderman Simon Fraser and Alderman Sue Hickey. Before we commence tonight, I'd like to welcome Martin Hughes from the City North Church to start our meeting in prayer. And join me in standing if you are able. Welcome, Martin.
Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, giver of life, health and safety, thank you for the opportunity to make decisions for the good of this people in Glenorchy. This week in reconciliation, we pray for First Nations people, traditional custodians of the land. We pray that we will make good decisions here, closing the gap between those who have and those who have not. We pray that more and more Indigenous Australians would have access to employment, education, better healthcare and leadership. I pray this council would lead the way in this regard. Also want to pray for other people in Glenorchy who are marginalised, disadvantaged and unable to better their own quality of life. Lord God, would you please give us wisdom to know how to deal with the housing crisis in Tasmania. We pray for more people to receive housing and simple basic necessities that many of us take for granted. Lord, I want to pray for the churches in this area. You've given us all incredible responsibility for reaching the lost and caring for your flock. Strengthen leaders of churches to govern with great care the way that you have governed us. And finally, Lord, I want to pray for these people sitting here making important decisions. Give them wisdom, good governance, guide them in truth, so that we in Glenorchy Council area will be governed with integrity. In your name, amen.
Thank you very much, Martin.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I now take an opportunity to read a work health and safety statement for council meetings. Glenorchy City Council takes workplace health and safety seriously, and this includes physical and psychological safety. We have a duty to ensure that a safe workplace is provided for our employees, elected members, contractors, volunteers and members of the public who may be present in council's workplaces. Council meetings form part of council's workplace, and it is expected that everyone who attends council meetings will behave in a polite and respectful manner, refrain from using offensive language or making personal statements, and not be aggressive, threatening or speak in a hostile manner. Any disagreement should be expressed respectfully, and during debate and in decision making, we must remember we are elected to represent and serve the people of Glenorchy and to make our city the best it can be. Further to this, in line with council meeting rules, comments will be turned off for all online streams. It is not acceptable for members of the audience to call out opinions when they attend meetings in person, so it is logical, with streaming being our virtual chambers, that the same rules apply to participation online. We have 20 items on our agenda this evening, and agenda item 1 is apologies. We have apologies this evening from Alderman Angela Ryan, Alderman Kelly Sims and Alderman Melissa Carlton. Agenda item 2 is confirmation of minutes of the open meeting. Do I have someone move that the minutes of the council meeting held on 26th of April 2022 be confirmed? Move Alderman Richardson. Someone to second. Deputy Mayor. Any discussion of the minutes, Alderman Richardson? Any discussion of the minutes? I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That's carried unanimously. Item 3 is announcements by the Chair. As Martin referred to, it is National Reconciliation Week, and Australia's newly elected Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has powerfully spoken about the government's priority commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Similarly, Glenorchy City Council's Community Strategy 2021 to 2030 describes Council's priority goal to foster a community that understands and values the stories and aspirations of Aboriginal people. Objective 4 is to nurture Council's relationships with Aboriginal people and groups in the Glenorchy community to foster mutual respect and build cultural awareness. I have a number of meetings with members of Glenorchy's Aboriginal community coming up to continue these conversations. The National Reconciliation Week 2022 theme is Be Brave, Make Change. This is a challenge to all Australians, individuals, families, communities, organisations and governments to be brave and tackle the unfinished business of reconciliation so we can make change for the benefit of all Australians. National Reconciliation is a time for all Australians to learn and share about our shared histories, cultures and achievements, and to explore how each of us can contribute to achieving reconciliation in Australia. I encourage all of us to find out more about National Reconciliation Week by visiting the website and by talking to local members of our community. Another announcement this evening gives me pleasure to welcome Tim Horton, who is our Maintenance and Operations Supervisor, for presentation of a certificate to Tim as our Deputy Municipal Coordinator. So Tim, would you like to come forward, please? Do you want me to come to you? You come to me. You come this way if you like.
Over the table.
Yeah, you come this way if you like, so that people can see you on the screen.
Behind the scenes.
So, this certificate that I am presenting to Mr. Timothy Horton is to certify that Timothy Horton has been appointed the Deputy Municipal Coordinator for the Glenorchy City Council in accordance with the Emergency Management Act 2006. So, congratulations, Tim, on becoming. Thank you for taking on this role to keep our community safe. I'd also like to take this opportunity, I'll pass you the certificate, to acknowledge that Tim, who in our Deputy Mayor's words is just a good bloke as well, has also recently clocked up 40 years of service with Glenorchy City Council. So thank you for your contribution to our community. Over the past 40 years, that is a significant milestone. Must be a pretty good place to work.
So far, yes. Well, I'm a little bit worried at my first weather event. Seems to happen when I turn up. So.
Oh dear, oh dear. Well, on that note, I also take this opportunity, Tim, while you're here, to thank you and acknowledge the efforts of your team in the recent severe weather event we had here on and around the 6th of May. I know we've got a couple of members of the public gallery here tonight in relation to that matter, but certainly Council's team that you supervised did a lot of preparation work as best we possibly could to mitigate any effects of the storm damage, and are still carrying out work to in the aftermath to clean up the damage.
And still going on with it. So it was everything went as well as it could do on the day. I think we're lucky we had a good team out there working for us. So.
Sure. Well, thank you again.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
I think Timmy was 6 when he started, didn't he?
Moving on to item 4, pecuniary interest notification. Do any aldermen have any pecuniary interest or staff on any agenda items this evening? Cool. No. Agenda item 5, response to previous public questions taken on notice. We have a question on notice there from Tegan George in relation to hooning and dangerous driving in the Glenorchy City Council area. And the response is, which is quite lengthy, so I won't read it out, is contained within the agenda papers tonight. We have a question on notice from Janice Bryan in relation to Glenorchy's historic records that were stored in the St Matthew's Church. Once again, the answer is set out in the agenda papers there. And a question on notice from Mr Eddie Steenbergen in relation to McGill Rise, in relation to remediation or rectification works and the role of council in the McGill Rise issues going forward. Again, the answer is in the agenda. And another question from Shane Alderton in relation to the play space at Gibblands Reserve and the Montrose Foreshore Reserve Skate Park and the estimated costs of these projects. Again, the question is outlined in the agenda. We also recently received, before the agenda was published, questions on notice from Mr Bill Dodd from Claremont, and I will read it out. I see that you're here this evening, Bill. As Glenorchy City Council considers making cuts to council services and initiatives that many people rely on, it remains a fact that some businesses are not contributing their fair share of council rates. In particular, rates calculations for businesses do not take into consideration whether or not the venue has poker machines. Venues with poker machines pay the same rates as those without, despite these machines greatly increasing annual profits. Inflated poker machine profits come at the detriment and destitution of many people in the community. Question is, will GCC consider applying differential rates for poker machine venues? This is a measure that is clearly provisioned in the Local Government Act. I recommend doubling the rates as a statement of the GCC's long-standing stance against this harmful industry. And goes on with that, continued on with the statement. So thank you, Mr. Dodd, for your question. We will take it on notice and provide a considered response when we consider legal advice and the provisions in the Local Government Act further. But my instinct is very good question and most definitely worth exploring, given Glenorchy City Council's commitment, as you state, to minimising the harm caused by poker machines in our city of Glenorchy. So thank you for the question. We also received questions on notice from Samantha Batchelor from the Australian Services Union. And again, I'll read them out as they were received late last week. So one is for Alderman Fraser. At the last council meeting, Alderman Fraser, in regard to a motion calling for a review of council services, referred to needing to find some low-hanging fruit. Given the council's services are delivered by people, employees of council, this was an utterly disgusting reference to throw so flippantly around. It has caused deep offence. What action has, if any, Alderman Fraser taken to apologise to the hard-working employees at Glenorchy City Council, and by seeking to initiate a review outside of the council's strategic plan setting process, on what basis does Alderman Fraser believe a mandate exists to look at changing or reducing council services? Alderman Fraser, would you like to answer that question this evening?
I'll respond now. Thank you, Mayor. So I did go back to the recording of our last meeting just to check exactly what I did say, and I think it's fairly obvious that what I said about low-hanging fruit has been taken completely out of context. To be clear, I don't consider anyone employed by Glenorchy City Council to be low-hanging fruit. Everyone has an important role to play, and I probably should have used a different turn of phrase so my meaning was a bit clearer. I was, of course, referring to the need for a sense of urgency in reducing some of our operational costs, and my hope was and is that there are some quick wins that can be achieved in this area. That's why I use the phrase low-hanging fruit. The second part of that question refers to a mandate to review council services. Well, I believe that that's what I was elected to do. That is my role, to make sure this organisation is always accountable to its community, and of course, most importantly, that the organisation continues to be financially sustainable, which at the moment it's not. So I understand that ASU organiser Samantha Batchelor is trying to do what she considers to be her job here, but this sort of adversarial type of approach that she's using, extremely unhelpful. And if she'd bothered to watch what I said in moving the motion for a review of council services, which passed unanimously, by the way, she would have seen that this is exactly what I was hoping we can avoid.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Another question from Samantha Batchelor of the Australian Services Union. Similarly, at the last council meeting, Alderman Sue Hickey focused on the division of so-called core and non-core services. This is certainly not something defined in the Local Government Act. You named up, for example, childcare and the Jobs Hub as non-core services. The council's strategic plan said the community placed high value on childcare services, and to another extent, an area you may consider non-core, the arts. As I understood it, councils are responsive to the needs and wants of their community. So I ask, on what authority do you define these services as potentially non-core and flag the prospect of them not being delivered by council? Alderman Hickey, would you like to respond this evening?
I would, thank you, Mayor, and I'd also like to thank Samantha Batchelor for her question. The Glenorchy City Council, as we know, has had 10 operating deficits in the past 11 years, and it continues to be in financial difficulties, limiting the standard of the services that this council would like to offer to its residents. My mandate, or if you like, with my authority as a duly elected alderman, I believe I'm legally and morally obliged to ensure to the best of my abilities the financial viability of this council so that it can continue to offer services and protect the jobs of as many of our employees as is possible, amongst many other responsibilities. Whilst core and non-core functions are not specified in the Local Government Act, basic business knowledge would explain the concepts as those the council is legislated to provide, such as planning, plumbing, public health and sanitation and building, and those it likes to provide but is not obliged to provide, the Jobs Hub, some of the arts and childcare. I'm personally very proud of the very passionate work of all of the staff in these areas. However, there is no inner city council that provides childcare services or even a jobs hub. And childcare presents a competitive neutrality risk for this council. Even the Brighton City Council Brighton Council does not operate childcare. The private sector does this very well for their community. I rang up the Kingborough Council and the girl on the phone said, what is a jobs hub? So they don't have one either. In my opinion, I think it is most unfortunate the staff have to worry about their positions, but until this council makes some very hard decisions on how it is going to fund the backlog of maintenance, fix its footpaths, roads, parks, and be sustainable into the future, then there will continue to be uncertainty for some staff members, which is very regrettable. The staff of this council, I believe, deserve to have a great career opportunity for themselves and not be under the immense pressure they find themselves in because of the unfilled vacancy management due to cost cutting. This is the current method enforced by this council, and I find it to be very inefficient and unfair, and that is to save money. So I thank Samantha Batchelor for her question, but I do hope she sees that we are doing this in the best interest of the majority of staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. We now move to agenda item 6, public question time. We have 15 minutes allocated for public question time. Do any members of the public joining us this evening have a question for public question time? Mr. Steenbergen, come forward, please.
Nice to see you.
Thought you weren't coming up here for a minute. Thought you weren't going to come up for a minute.
I've got some questions about the closed session today. I often wonder about why items are in closed session, whether they need to be. So my first questions are about item 18, which is about something called a green shoots application to the Tasmanian Community Fund. Now, I know about the Community Fund, but I wonder why this is in closed session. So I'll ask a few questions which you might be able to answer. Does this relate to an application by an external body to the Community Fund? Just starting off with simple questions.
Sure.
Does it relate to an application by an external body?
Would you like to answer, gentlemen?
It's an application by Glenorchy City Council, but it does involve other partners.
Okay. And what does green shoots mean in this context?
Green Shoots is about an employment incubator.
So, Mr. Steenbergen, you may recall when we received funding through the economic stimulus program on the back of COVID, we were presented with an economic recovery program as a council that contained a number of projects, which you and I have had some discussions about along the way, and council most recently received a report on those projects. I think at our January or February meeting this year, might have been our February meeting, we received a full report on the status of those projects. And I'm testing my memory, but my recollection is Green Shoots was included in there and certainly was a project that was identified at the very start, with the aim being around supporting young people and particularly migrant people and people from refugee backgrounds to develop their entrepreneurial and making skills in Glenorchy.
So to try and clarify things, is this agenda item to approve or not
So
a negotiated arrangement to go ahead?
Sure. So we received we allocated from our economic recovery stimulus funding, program funding, the interest-free loan from the government. We had allocated $320,000 from that $5 million budget towards the Green Shoots program. I guess the item in closed council is to consider the making of a grant application to expand that budget, if you like.
So this project requires
Additional
grant
funding.
funds.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. That's what we'll do for that now. Another question, which actually goes back a step. In the agenda, it mentions that the Alderman participated in a workshop about the UTAS move to the city. Now, I know I've read somewhere that Clarence felt the need and came to a view. So I'm wondering why Glenorchy Council felt the need to discuss it.
Thank you, Mr.
It's a
Steenbergen.
wide question.
Sure. My understanding is that University of Tasmania are consulting with a wide range of stakeholders on the move into the CBD, including a number of councils. And so the General Manager and I had a conversation with Vice Chancellor Rufus Black from UTAS, and we talked about having a presentation to a council workshop to explain and have the opportunity to ask questions about that move into the CBD. My understanding is they're doing a wide range of consultation with
So this was in response to an approach by the university.
Yes.
And did the councils come to a consensus on how they felt about the proposal?
No, definitely. Workshops are not decision-making forums, as you know, Mr. Steenbergen. And the purpose of the workshop was to inform aldermen rather than for any decision-making or consensus-gathering exercise. We all have our own individual views. It's not something that we see need to form a council position on.
Now, on a totally and utterly separate topic, I noticed on the way in that there's a for lease sign on the Centrelink building, which is a building that a great many people in Glenorchy would have a need for. Can council shed any light on what's going on there?
Did you say there's a police sign?
A for lease.
Oh, for lease. I thought you said police. I'm thinking police are moving in. That'd be nice. A for lease sign. Sorry, whereabouts, Mr. Steenbergen?
This is the Centrelink building.
Oh, the
Building
Centrelink.
that the great many residents in Glenorchy will know, unfortunately, have to actually visit on occasion.
Yes. No, that's a private matter and I'm not aware of any.
It's only partial part of the building is actually police. Centrelink will be staying there.
Thank you.
Answer. Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further questions, Mr. Steenbergen?
Yes, item 19 in the closed session, which is about the review of council services. Now, I assume that relates to the decision at the last meeting about the surface level review. I'm wondering why it's in closed session.
Sure. General Manager?
Through you, Mayor. So the purpose of the meeting is to discuss a review of council services and provide options to aldermen in relation to that review, including the budget levels and the process going forward. Because it involves potentially changes to council staffing, it's appropriate for that matter to be discussed in private, in closed council, because it provides an opportunity for aldermen to ask and receive candid answers. I would propose, following a decision from council, to then be communicating with staff about the outcome of the discussion.
So isn't tonight's agenda item simply about the business case? Or is it about more than that?
Sorry?
Last meeting it was,
It's certainly not about any specific, it's about the process going forward, so it's not about, it's not about making any particular decisions at this stage about what happens with council staffing. It's simply about the options for proceeding with the review of council services.
thank you. The storm we had on May 6 has already been mentioned, and council already known I'm interested in McGill Rise, and it occurred to me that a storm like that could actually do drastic things to McGill Rise. Do we know if it actually made the situation any worse?
Thank you, Mr. Steenbergen. General Manager, or would you like
Once again, council staff were actively monitoring McGill Rise to ensure that there were no issues around that. What I would say is that council took action last year to ensure that there were a number of properties that presented a risk to life, and council acted to ensure that those properties were vacated to protect from risk to life. We're working through a process with the building owners in relation to building control matters to seek to move towards rectification of the issues there.
Can you sort of shed any light on this process, because it has been 12 months since those 8 dwellings were vacated?
I guess what I would say is that the concerns that arose at the time were around the stability of building platforms that had been put in place on the site and the potential for those to cause problems. That's an issue that we're working through with the building owners, and obviously that's involving expert engineering advice, and we're in a dialogue with those building owners, and there may be other legal processes in play that.
But I'm aware that CBOS is still doing its thing at this stage.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on in that space, but what I would say is the council is acting within its powers to continue to monitor the safety of that particular subdivision. So we're continuing to act to protect public safety.
Thank you. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Steenbergen. Mr. Ayres, would you like to come forward?
My concern is pretty much the same as the petition that's the next item. I have lived at 42 Chandos Drive since 1975, and through that period of time, so far I have managed to document 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 flooding events, one of which let a little bit of water into the house, most of which just made an absolute mess of the driveway, the lawns, my workshop, pushed over the back fence and things of that nature. In saying that, I realise that people down Mary's Hope Road and a couple of houses further up Calanda Crescent were severely damaged. So the fact that I once in one of these historic floods got the carpet inside the front door a bit down doesn't seem like much. But we're right at the very base of Calanda, and in the flooding events, I have filmed water coming down Calanda, across the field, down Berridale Road, from Taree Street, and actually from a little bit around the other side of Chandos Drive. I guess laying all that out, my question is, what is to be done, what can be done, and what are the plans that are going to unfold to help us with that? One more comment. At the top of Dooley's Avenue, in that cul-de-sac, a number of years ago after one of the flooding events, there was I don't know the proper name of it, but a sort of a scoop drain with a grill on it leading to a pipe, which had been clogged up with a bit of debris. But of course that catchment area there is quite large, so it wouldn't have coped anyway. But after this last flood, we went up there and there is absolutely no trace of the entrance to that drain. So why would that be closed? Because although it would only be a small amount of help, it would be some help.
So that was on Dooley's Avenue.
That was on, Dooley's Avenue, right at the top of the cul-de-sac, between the two tracks that go up. One of them, I think, is called the Dooley's Fire Trail. That's the one that goes to the left. I don't know what the one to the right is.
Sure. Okay. Thank you,
So-
Mr. Ayres.
I guess it's two questions concerning
Sure.
dealing with the floods.
Thank you. General Manager, would you like to answer or
Yes.
defer to
Yeah.
the Director?
Through you, Mayor. So two really general streams of response. One is the immediate aftermath of the event, and our maintenance crews were on site and working overtime to clear the debris that had flowed down into the area. I guess the commentary from our engineers is that with these events, what happens is that the stormwater overflows our stormwater system, and it basically follows the natural drainage paths. So in terms of the response going forward, there are two streams. One is that we will be our engineers are going to be looking to review our stormwater system and any enhancements we can make to respond to that. And I might, in a second, just ask our Director of Infrastructure and Works to provide some more comment on that. And the second thing that we'll be doing is, of course, responding to insurance claims that come forward and bringing those to the attention of our insurers for investigation. through you, I might invite the Director of Infrastructure and Works to just provide some more detail.
Thank you, Director. Emilio Reali. You can stay there if you like, Mr. Ayres.
Should I go? Your space.
Thank you. Thank you, through you, Mayor. Just on some of the specific issues that were raised, on the day, we're very much aware of the stormwater inlet that blocked. It had blocked, as Mr. Ayres indicated once before. Some work was undertaken to widen that entrance, put a grate over it, fence it, and to try and stop the debris from blocking it up, so easily. With this last storm event, we had over 110 millimetres in about 12 hours, so it's a significant amount of rainfall, quite a large volume for the capacity of our pipes. And as you described, there are two valleys in that area that meet at a confluence and then go into that inlet. There was a lot of debris, tons and tons of debris, rubble, gravel, large boulders. So we thought there may have been a landslip. So engineers have actually been up and investigated the hillside itself, and it was just scouring from the amount of rain. So that catchment did seem to get most of the rain just because of the direction it's coming from. It's not one of the catchments that normally is affected in to that magnitude. So what can we do about it? Our hydraulic engineers are looking at, given this is the second time, looking at probably a sediment retention system. So if this is going to happen again where it's going to wash debris down, if we can set up something where it actually stops the debris from coming any further but still allows the water to come into that pipe system. So that's one thing that we're looking at. That's where the water starts its journey into the pipes. As soon as those pipes were blocked, the water started going overland, and then it started to affect other properties. But we have got a number of side entry pits where water actually comes in off the road into pits. We just couldn't get the water couldn't get in fast enough into the pipes, and the amount of water exceeded the volume of the pipes. So capacity, they'd reached capacity basically.
They've reached capacity in the park, the lid had blown off. That's stormwater because it was full from up the hill.
That's exactly right. When they reach capacity, it's called surcharging. They'll pop the manhole lids off and start running overland. We are looking at trying to get, one of the other projects we're looking at is more side entry pits up in Chandos Drive to get as much water in the system as possible to reduce the amount of overland flow. It may not take it away completely, but we're looking at trying to reduce that overland flow. And we're looking at where we might be able to do some system upgrades. But I guess we have to bear in mind that it was in old terms, we have 1 in 20, 1 in 50, 1 in 100 year floods. The calculations are it was about a 1 in 75 year flood event. So we had probably 3 areas that were worst affected. That area in the Berridale, Chandos Drive area, Glenorchy, Grove Road, Glenorchy. We had an area there where there is a pipe that's almost a metre in diameter and it's almost at the surface, and water topped over that, which caused some flooding. And we had Main Road, Glenorchy, where we actually had to clear a number of pits and the water did subside away. So we're looking at those 3 areas. I'm not saying they were the only areas, there were many areas, but they're probably the focus points initially to try and see what we can do in the short term. It is going to be a long-term project, and we'll have to work through a number of capital works programs over a number of years. But I guess each event we have, the results change, and so we're actually trying to make sure we can try and cater for a wide range of flooding events.
Would it be an encouragement or an attack if I were to look at a series of photographs of historical data from my location?
Would be very helpful. I've had a number of aldermen have presented photos that have been provided from residents, and it actually does help us work out where some of the pressure points are. So it actually would be very beneficial.
Okay, that'll be good.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ayres. Any further questions on notice tonight? Sorry, public question time. Any questions without notice? No? We did receive some questions on notice for public question time from Mr Russell Yaxley in relation asking what is the council doing to establish medium density residential housing, particularly between Moona and Glenorchy. And the answer is in the agenda there. How is the DCC working with other levels of government to fast track the supply of land? That answer is in the agenda there. And what is the status on the development of the old Claremont primary site, which is also in the agenda. We also received questions from Janice Bryan in relation to conservation plans for the St Matthew's Church. And whether previously held council historical records transferred to the Glenorchy History Group following its formation, which the answer is no. And that concludes public question time. Moving on to item 7, petitions or deputations. If anyone wants to address a council meeting, and General Manager, I believe we've received a petition from Mrs Wendy Ladin-Jawinski. Apologies to Wendy if I did pronounce that incorrectly, regarding severe weather and stormwater flooding on the 6th of May. So we've got a petition to be tabled. Thank you, General Manager. The petition has been tabled, and I did speak with Mrs Ladin-Jawinski on Friday, and she apologised for not being here this evening, but we've heard from Mr Ayres this evening, and Ms McDonald is here as well to represent the petitioners. So, General Manager, I understand we table the petition and then council will receive a report.
Well, I might just mention that it's from the residents of Croom Court, Corralin Court and Callanda Crescent at Berrydale, and it provides some details also of the flood damage, and there's some video that's been provided, and our engineers have got that information and are using it as part of their response. With your indulgence, I might just invite the Executive Officer to just comment about the petition itself.
Sure.
Thank you, General Manager. Through you, Mayor, just on a technical point, the petition itself doesn't actually comply with the requirements under the Local Government Act for a formal petition. We've chosen to table it here at the council meeting anyway, because it's obviously an issue that is a significant concern to those residents. Ordinarily, what would happen with a formal petition that met the requirements is we'd bring back a council report at the next meeting. In this case, obviously, we've already addressed the concerns of the residents, and the Director has informed us that there'll be various investigations and works happening in that area. So we don't propose to table a further report. If the petitioners themselves would like a further report to council about it, and it's probably not necessary, we'll probably achieve just as much through working with the officers. I'm more than happy to discuss with you the requirements for meeting the formal requirements of a petition, and will provide some contact details for you later on. But in the meantime, yes, action obviously being taken in respect of that petition, irrespective that it doesn't meet the formal requirements under the Local Government Act.
Thank you, Executive Officer. And I did respond with a letter to Wendy on Friday, and I requested she share that with the signatories to the petition as well, and I'll share that with all aldermen as well, so you understand the information that's been provided back to the petitioners. Thank you, General Manager, and thank you, Executive Officer, and thank you to the people who have brought this forward for Council's attention. Moving on to item 8, activities of the Mayor. Sorry, Deputy Mayor, did you have a question?
I'll call you up. I was going to say something.
That's okay, no problem. Item 8, activities of the Mayor. We have a recommendation that Council receive the report about the activities of myself, Mayor Thomas, during the period from Wednesday 20th of April to Sunday 22nd of May 2022. Do I have someone to move? Deputy Mayor, someone to second? Alderman Richardson. Deputy Mayor.
No, Mayor, I've been busy as usual. He's a little beaver. Didn't do enough to get the jack jumpers over the line, I'm afraid, but you did your best.
Thank you, tried. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Ball.
Yes, in regards to the Jack Jumpers games. I see on May the 6th you avoided the flooding by going to Sydney.
I did.
Is that a private thing that you did? It's
Yeah.
not, you weren't representing as mayor by an invitation or?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I guess, attending the Jack Jumpers games. Given they have their home base here in Glenorchy, I'm always representing the Glenorchy community. And as Mayor, I don't know that you ever take off that hat of representing the community, like it or not. So, but most definitely I attended in a personal capacity, in that certainly I paid for the expenses associated with that.
And to Sydney too.
Yes, to Sydney and
Thank
to
you.
tickets, yes. Yep.
And it's fair to say that a number of people noticed you in Sydney on
That's right.
TV.
Yes, sorry about that.
So, fair to
Number
say.
one cheer supporter, cheer squad with my clapper. Any further questions? Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. On the 5th of May, you met with Alan Levy, City General Victoria, Tasmanian, the Southern Cross Austereo. With an understanding of the context of that meeting, please.
Sure. So I'm actually met Ali Bradley at a Jack Jumpers game, talking about the Jack Jumpers, and she said it would be really good to catch up for a coffee because we hadn't met before, and obviously her role at Southern Cross Austereo is around promotions and communications, and so obviously it's really good networking to have relationships with people in that industry. She's also on the board of the St Virgil's School. So we got talking about sporting facilities and the capacity, potentially one of council's aims through our sport and recreation strategy is looking to open up school facilities, sports facilities for use, given we just don't have enough ovals and courts and all that sort of thing. So as a result of that meeting, we're going to have a meeting with principal at St Virgil's and the sports director to talk about opportunities to work together in that regard as well. So just generally a meet and greet.
Additional question, the Mission Australia board meeting or meeting with the national board members, the context of that one.
Sure. So obviously Mission Australia run Chipwell House and also run the Youth Beat, the Mission Australia Youth Beat program, which comes to council lawns every Monday afternoon to provide some connection opportunities with youth workers for the young people, and a free barbecue, I think, on most occasions, or some sort of free food and some activities, which is a really valuable service to our community and one we'd like to see expanded. So with the national board visiting, the staff thought it would be really beneficial for myself and Jill Slaters, our coordinator of community development, to go and speak with the board to tell them how beneficial that program is, and I guess try and encourage them to not only continue it but expand it, because we'd love to see more of it in our CBD and across our broader community as well.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion of the item? Go back to the move, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. You've covered that beautifully.
Excellent. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 9, council fees and charges for 2022-23. And we have a recommendation that council approve the fees and charges for the 2022-23 financial year as detailed in the schedule of fees and charges forming attachment 1, other than fees and charges for landfill operations and waste services. And note that fees and charges for landfill operations and waste services are subject to approval as part of a separate report to this council meeting. Do I have someone to move that recommendation, please? Deputy Mayor, someone to second? Alderman Richardson, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I've had a good look at all these increases. There was one confusing, I think it's probably in the attachment, so I have to find it. I had it marked there before where it said it went up 2.5%, but in another section it said it went up 5%. So I can't remember which one it was. I just have to have a look, but it all makes sense. Although it's a lot lower than CPI in a lot of cases. So
yes,
I think CPI is going to keep going at the moment. So our little contribution won't dent it a great deal.
thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion of the item? I have a few questions, if I may. Mr. Manager, the table on page 22 of the report, and this may be what you were alluding to, Deputy Mayor, has 8 out of the 14 fees and charges increasing by 2.5%, but the introduction to and body of the report reads 3.5%, except where there are special circumstances or full cost recovery is required. I'm just wondering if you can please clarify which is correct.
Through you, Mayor, they're both correct. So the situation is that the table on page 22 shows the total budgeted revenue that we're expecting from those various fees and charges. But there are two things in play. The first is the face value of the increase, which in many cases is 3.5%. But the other thing to take into account is the volume that we anticipate for the various services. So, for example, let's have a look at, say, planning services, where we're expecting a decrease in the volume of applications just because we're coming off record high development activity. As a result of that, even though the face value of those charges may have increased, the volume of applications that we're expecting has reduced, and therefore we've seen in that particular case a reduction overall. So the bottom of that table talks about outside of our waste management services and landfill operations, overall we're anticipating, notwithstanding the general kind of 3.5% increase for many of our fees, we're expecting, given changes in the volume of those services being demanded, that we're looking at only a 0.36% overall increase in revenue as a result of that 3.5% general increase.
Right. So in the attachments, the increased dollar amounts of those fees and charges reflect a 3.5% increase.
Correct.
But what you're saying is that as a result of the actual activity, the change we'll see won't be equivalent to 3.5, it'll be equivalent to 2.5 in those 8 instances.
That's correct. So that table is showing the increase for each service type in terms of the overall revenue that we expect.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So a question, if I may, then, Mayor, I found one. So that's the same when you're referring to the change percentage, 2.5% for childcare with both Berriedale and Benjafield, and yet in the childcare centre thing it says the increase by 5%. So is that the two combined, or is that?
Look, I might get our suggested our director response to that one.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. At both childcare centres, all fees have increased by 5%. So to clarify that point, and as the General Manager has outlined, the increase in total revenue has been conservatively picked at, as you see in front of you in that table. So that's predicting a increase in overall charges by 2.5. But certainly the fees that we've increased have been 5% at both centres.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So Mayor, can I just ask why you're expecting less patronage at both those childcare centres?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. We would suggest in both childcare centres that those figures are very conservative. So we would expect to, if nothing changes, we would expect to be in a better position than the budget forecast.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a further question, if I may, then, and again, alluding to the Deputy Mayor's comment around inflation, the central forecast is for headline inflation to peak at around 6% in the second half of this year, and I know it was 5.1% for the March quarter. So I expect the cost of doing business to council is likely to increase more than 3.5%. I know the cost of delivering services is split between employee costs, staff costs, and some external costs, but have we done any forecasting on, like we've got this forecasting here of revenue, have we done any forecasting of the increased cost of services? And can we be confident that a general increase of 3.5%, except where there's special circumstances, is sufficient to adequately cover the cost of doing business?
The answer to that question would be, first of all, I'd say that the increase in CPI for all groups for Hobart was actually 5.8%. The national figure was 5.1%. In terms of the assessment of our cost situation, that's really set out in our draft budget.
Okay.
So again, just alluding to the Mayor's question, if I may, through you, Mayor, Does that allow though for future I mean, we haven't really, or have we allowed enough, do you think, for the nature of inflation at the moment? It's just going through the roof. Can we make changes? We can, can't we? We can make adjustments to the budget if we need to. Special resolution.
To fees and services though?
Yeah.
Through you, Mayor. So, well, yes, the council has an ability to make changes to the fees and charges. We work, I guess, on the basis of our long-term financial management plan, which identifies the longer-term trend in CPI. So I guess we'd be doing sort of we'd be forecasting we're kind of speculating in terms of what the future numbers might look like, and we generally what we're doing is relying on historical trends to set our budgetary figures, because there's a longer track record with those. Otherwise, we're kind of crystal ball gazing in terms of the forecast going forward.
But we could make changes if we had to. That's what I'm saying. Yes. If we were desperate, if things get out of hand. I mean, we don't be adding to the whole process, but you know, just want everyone to be aware that we can make changes if we need to.
I'd say in relation to the question about what that number ought to look like, we've been conscious of the feedback we've had in relation to the rates number, and so that has also been something we've taken into account in looking at what we had, I think previously had a 2.5% increase in factored into our fees and charges. We've gone back to staff when we heard the latest CPI number and increased that to 3.5. So we've reworked our fees and charges based on the 3.5.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the item?
Mayor, I think we should just point out that there is the council's financial hardship policy. If anybody is stuck, if they have to be charged for one of these fees, but they are in dire straits, then they're welcome to contact the council for assistance.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. I'm happy to speak in support of the recommendations here. Obviously, no one likes increased fees and charges, and no one likes to have the decision to make to increase fees and charges, but we have a responsibility as a council to make financial decisions that are in the best interests of this council and our community overall, and making sure our books can balance as best as possible at the end of the day. And hence my questions around, is that enough? Because it would be robbing Peter to pay Paul. If we don't charge enough through our fees and charges, it'll come down to a cost to the ratepayer at the end of the day overall. So I'm happy to support this recommendation. And if there's no further discussion on my board.
Sorry, it's just one question, if I may, Mayor. Just in there, I see with all the costs it's giving you the proposed charges, bootload. Then I'm looking for, I'm just wondering if people, had a trailer, what the cost would be, because it then skips to trucks with dual axle trailers behind trucks.
I think you may be jumping ahead to item 10, Alderman Ball.
Oh, have I?
Yep.
My apologies.
Held that question for the next item.
Am I?
So if there's no further discussion, I'll go back to the Deputy Mayor to close debate.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, without a doubt, we're seeing inflation take hold of the country and the world, and we have to make sure that we cover our costs. The first rule of business, you don't cover your costs, you go broke. And I hope we are covering our costs. I don't mean that in a detrimental way to our staff in any way, shape or form, but things are going faster than some people can deal with in business. And so we really need to be mindful of our costs and how they're growing. And just fuel, for example, I can't imagine what the council fuel bill's gone out to, or everything that's going up. It's just, so this is something I think we need to report back at least every couple of months at the moment to know whether we need to make any drastic changes to contain this rising inflation. But I'm in support of what we've got at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll put the recommendations to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Item 10, proposed waste management fees and charges for 2022-23. We have, bear with me, a recommendation that council approve the following curbside fees for the 2022-23 financial year, and the table set out before us in our agenda. Approve the following disposal charges for the Jackson Street Waste Management Centre for the 2022-23 financial year, again in the table set out. And 3, approve the cessation of the annual free waste disposal weekend for the reasons outlined in this report under the heading Free Waste Disposal Weekend for residents. Do I have someone to move these 3 recommendations, please? Alderman Dunsby.
I can move an alternative motion.
What might that be?
So items 1 and 2 stay, but I'd like to hold recommendation 3 over potentially for another meeting.
Alternative motion moved by Alderman Dunsby. Do I have anyone to second that? And in which case that will become the motion. That's right, General Manager, isn't it?
Correct.
Mayor, I'll second it for the purpose of debate.
Okay.
So it's hold number 3 over.
So we'll just have 1 and 2, 3 will be as part of the recommendation.
So you're proposing that comes back to a future meeting, Alderman Dunsby? Seconded Alderman Hickey, so that becomes the motion that we are debating. Alderman Dunsby, would you like to speak to that motion?
Oh, yes, thank you. So I'm struggling to come to terms with some of a few of the justifications that are in the recommendations before us in this report. So contrary to the disclosure by the document author, my first view of this was when it was presented as part of the meeting papers for tonight. If there was a step process to include aldermen, I suggest that check sheet gets checked and that it is included that we are provided with that information in the future. A heads up probably on this proposed significant change may have been good through a workshop process as well. It is significant, for instance, to take away free tip access. And for me, as an elected member, I would like the opportunity to be as informed as I can on that issue, to contact other areas and to talk to people in my community as well. And so the limited time frame didn't allow me to do that as an elected member. Overall, the increases are minimal, but collectively they'll add to the already struggling household budget of many. We've yet to set the final budget and see the impact on ratepayers, but knowing their contribution is the highest income stream for council. In some cases, we're taking the bread and butter from family tables. We've challenged the General Manager to find operational savings as we consider the upcoming budget, and this ticks the box. It's almost the equivalent of a 1% rate increase. However, is our community prepared to accept less for more? That becomes a dilemma elected members have to decide. The state government waste levy is being introduced this year, and it's another example of tax by stealth on householders. And we said in these proposed changes is an effect of around 3%, with higher amounts budgeted in coming years. Nice and convenient that we act as the collection agency for this, as we do with the fire levy, but there's no benefit for Glenorchy City Council. In fact, I would imagine with the staff required to manage it, it actually costs us money to do that. But it adds to the perception that it is a council charge. Nothing we can do about it, but it is a perception and it does concern me. I commend the introduction of commercial FOGO collections. Businesses, particularly those who produce retail food type products in amounts to see significant change in the disposal as FOGO, as opposed to being mixed with general waste, will definitely make a difference. I do object to some of the arguments put forward as a justification to remove the free trip weekend and free passes. In particular, the argument should be a user pays basis. The very same arguments that were put forward to support the introduction of the compulsory FOGO service, a service where people who diligently dealt with their household waste were compelled to pay a fee of originally $75, now up to $81 in this proposed document. The service imposed on many 1 and 2 households who generate very little FOGO waste, yet found the opt-out process too intimidating. So they suck up the added cost on the annual bill. Personally, I believe user pays is the fairest outcome, and my arguments to make this case with FOGO are obviously well known. As mentioned in the papers, it is time critical to adopt these fees and charges, but they can't be thrown at us with significant changes to process and a timer ticking loudly to get it over the line. And so there comes my suggestion to adopt 1 and 2, which does allow that to happen. I'll be very interested to hear the comments, opinions and questions from the debate around the table of my colleagues for us to accept 1 and 2, but that the recommendation that we did see at 3 is held over for the reasons I've outlined from my personal view.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Further discussion of the item? Alderman Ball, you have a question?
I'm back again. Thank you. Yes, just with it's talking about the waste types, you know, the bootload, but there's nothing there about the domestic car with a trailer on the back. I was just wondering, what is the fee for that and where is it covered?
Manager for Waste, would you like to come forward and answer that question? Sorry, just for the microphone.
That's all right.
I gave you a warning.
Luke Chu, Manager of Property, Environment and Waste.
Thank you, Mayor. On Alderman Ball, I think you're probably looking at the section which is the section that refers to when the weighbridge is non-operational. So if the weighbridge isn't working, we've set out fees based on volume. Generally, it would be done on weight. So there is a minimum fee of $12, rising to $13 plus levy is $15. Beyond that, if you're more than a 0.25 square metre load, it'd be based on weight. So you'd be charged on a pro rata per tonne.
So yeah, understand that. Yes, no, I did misunderstand that. But so therefore, it'd just be on a site and a bit of a guesstimate, would it, if the
weight was down?
Yeah,
that's right. Which only happens on rare occasions. But yeah, generally you just weigh it on the way in and the way out.
Right.
You pay your weight.
No, thank you.
Thank you. That all the questions you have?
Thank you. Yes.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I hear and understand Alderman Dunsby's concerns, and they're very real, but I'm comfortable going back to the removal of the free waste disposal. I note in the report that one of the concerns that we had free waste disposal in the first place was to stop people dumping rubbish in the back streets and all the rest of it, and the report here overlays that and overcomes that and suggests that that wasn't the case anyway, that wasn't why people dumped rubbish, that was more circumstances rather than because they didn't want to spend money to go to the tip. I can see the savings or the cost that it was to us to have this free day. There's no free lunches, and it's costing the whole community that $45,000, and the stress and strain that it put on the waste centre on the 2 days in question. I've talked to some of the staff, and without talking out of school, you know, it was a stressful time for them. And the traffic lined up a long way back. It was stressful for the people waiting to get in, and that's not no one's fault. It's just circumstances. And I tend to think that you're better off to remove that free day and use a pay system be in place. But I accept fully Alderman Dunsby's really looked into this and given a very good synopsis of what went on with FOGO and all the rest of it. I appreciate that. But at the same time, I'm not concerned about, not concerned, that's not the right word, but I think it's probably appropriate to take that free day out, you know, because there is no freeness in all this. It's cost somebody somewhere.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion? Alderman Hickey.
I'd like to thank Alderman Dunsby for championing the cause and for her concern about those who are in financial difficulty. And we, as responsible aldermen, share that concern. However, I do believe the officers have made a very good case about this costing the council $45,000 a year, which includes disposal costs, traffic, risk management, additional staffing, machinery and preparation works. But if you go by the user pay method, then the people with no money who can't afford the petrol in the car to get their rubbish to the rubbish removal waste area, then they're still paying through their rates if they're having to pay rates. So I think it's tragic. I don't want to see rubbish sitting around the city. I think that's a very bad look. But I do know that the council is open to financial hardship in areas where I remember approaching the council to help clean up a public housing area, and we managed, because it was for a good cause, to get the fees waived. So understanding also that I've lived in this municipality for 13 years, never used a free tip docket, because it's never occurred on a day that my rubbish happened to be ready, or they'd be changed on days because of weather, etc., like that at short notice. So I think we are obliged to take the advice, definitely challenge it, of our officers, and I always like to see a good challenge of officer advice. I don't like it just being accepted verbatim, but in this case, there are some really good reasoning and arguments where you know, a few hundred people will get the benefit of it, but not the whole municipality. And the flow-on effects, it will just get more and more expensive. So I am happy to support the recommendation in full, all three sections.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Alderman Dunphy, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Perhaps I haven't made this particularly clear. I'm not questioning what's in the document. I'm just questioning the process and asking to buy some more time for it. Not sitting here, I have some personal opinions, haven't made a discussion, want to hear my colleagues. It's just about delaying the process to be able to be a bit more informed.
So your question is, can the process be delayed?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm not questioning what's there, it's just about the process. Thank you.
Thank you. So as a question, Alderman Dunsby, I might ask Director Riali, can the process, or Manager Luke too, can the decision be delayed? What impact would that have?
Through you, Mayor, it would require another report to come to council if we delayed the decision now. I guess the arguments would still be the same, the reasoning would be the same. I guess it would allow more time to workshop the issue, which I take on board your comments, Alderman Dunsby. But you know, we won't be able to advertise or prepare for it until we actually got a definite decision. So.
Thank you, Director. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Fraser.
Yeah, look, although I understand Alderman Dunsby's concerns, and I agree it would have been perhaps good to be able to discuss this in a more informal setting first, just to get some better idea of why this is being proposed. But as the Director has just said, the rationale has been spelled out fairly well in the agenda of the report. I mean, the fact of the matter is that society is heading in a direction where we just can't keep throwing stuff in a hole in the ground. And particularly with the introduction of the waste levy, that was starting at $20 and coming to $60, it's just not going to be economical to throw bulk stuff into the landfill anymore. And I guess that's probably the key difference with FOGO. FOGO, in my mind anyway, was another initiative designed to keep waste out of landfill and use it as a byproduct for something else. And so that was probably a key difference in my mind between the free waste and the FOGO service. So yeah, I'm happy to approve this, the recommendations 1, 2 and 3 as they are.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion? Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I've got to agree. This is the least palatable role of being an alderman, inflicting fees and charges and withdrawing free service. And do so reluctantly, but we have a responsibility to manage the budget, and we have to take that on board. The free weekend does cause problems with change with weather conditions and communication safety issues, and only I think 1,400 people use that service, and the rest of us have to pay for that service to be provided. So I suppose I think we have a responsibility to manage that. So I'm happy to approve the recommendation as it is in the papers.
Thank you. Alderman Richardson. I'm just seeking some clarification from the General Manager on procedural matters here. But whilst we do that, I too will speak to Alderman Dunsby's alternative motion, and I appreciate Alderman Dunsby bringing this view forward, and the view that it would have been ideal to perhaps have a workshop conversation about this to explore other options. But like most of my colleagues around the table, I support the motion in its original form. I think it's quite clearly outlined within the report why it's not feasible to continue the free waste weekend. I originally supported its introduction a few years ago, and at the time, though, I recall noting that there's no such thing as a free waste weekend, that ultimately it comes at a cost to the ratepayer, but I was willing to give it a try and to help us understand the costs and the benefits. Council's provided the free waste weekend for 3 years now at a cost to the ratepayer of around $45,000 per year, as we've heard. In this time, around 1,400 people per year have used the service, which equates to 6% of all households at a cost of $32 per resident using the service paid for by all ratepayers. Now, whilst I understand we all pay some taxes for services we don't use, and this is important to achieving fairness and equity in our community, there are other factors that contribute to this decision, perhaps most significantly the pending introduction of the waste levy and the corresponding desperate need to reduce the amount of waste going to landfill. We have evidence that people don't separate waste as effectively. When dumping, it is free, which is damaging for our environment and increasingly expensive. As the report clearly articulates, if we had a voucher system, which a lot of people in our community often suggest, that itself is administratively problematic. But even if we only had, half of all rateable properties using the voucher, the cost to the ratepayer going forward would be over $350,000 per year. So I think the report sets out quite clearly the rationale, and no matter what options we explore in a workshop, I think we'll still come to the same decision. So I think we owe it to our community just to make a decision and get on with it rather than string it out. As I say, ultimately, there's no such thing as a free waste weekend, never has been, never will be, and I'm supportive of abandoning it as a gift to 1,400 community members in favour of reducing waste to landfill and ultimately the cost to the ratepayer overall. So I too would prefer to support the motion in its original format, and I just seek some clarity from the General Manager on how we go forward if this motion is lost, because I fear if the motion is lost, it means the item is dealt with and we aren't able to pass our waste fees. So just seek clarity on how we deal with this matter.
So there is an ability. So the issue is that at the moment we've got a motion before council that we obviously originally had an officer's recommendation that had the approval of the curbside waste disposal fees, the approval of the Jackson Street landfill fees, and that third item, which seems to be the bone of contention, which is the free landfill weekend. And clearly there are aldermen that have spoken, both some for the amended or the motions before council now, which is 1 and 2. Others that have spoken for the original officer's recommendation, which is 1, 2, and 3. The risk is, I guess, if the current motion, which is 1 and 2, is voted down on the basis that people believe that there still needs to be further resolution of the free waste weekend issue, then we're in a situation where we haven't approved the curbside waste disposal fees or the Jackson Street landfill fees.
Can someone amend it?
Can we just
without going in, there is an ability to discuss resolved matters and come back over it again, but it's fairly limited under the regs. My suggestion would be that with the approval of the mover and seconder, that we simply say that that 1 and 2 be dealt with separately from 3.
Or a foreshadowed motion. Would that be appropriate? Foreshadowed motion?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, sure.
A foreshadowed motion to go back to the original motion.
Yep. So
That was the simplest thing. Can we do that, Brett?
yes, yep. So you'd like to move a
I'd like to
foreshadowed
move
motion?
a foreshadowed motion that we go back to the original motion.
Yep. If this motion is
If
lost.
this motion is lost.
Yep.
So it still leaves it in play.
Yep.
The game's not over.
Yep.
Good.
Complex.
Sorry.
Okay. Foreshadowed motion moved by the Deputy Mayor. So that doesn't need to be seconded yet. We play on.
Yep.
Game's not over. Play on round 1 to continue debating the alternative motion moved by Alderman Dunsby with the foreshadowed motion in play to revert to the original motion should Alderman Dunsby's motion be lost. Would anyone like to speak further to Alderman Dunsby's motion? Alderman Bull?
No, just a quick question. Do we need a seconder for the deputy mayors?
Not yet, only if the motion's lost.
Too much
Thank
power,
you.
mate. Too much.
I think everyone's spoken.
Thank you. Yep, everyone's spoken. Okay,
Back to the mover.
back to the mover, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. I think you possibly understand it was more about the process than what was there. And I thought that my view there by taking that out, that we had an opportunity to progress that potentially at another place. I'll take the advice of the General Manager that that's not the way that I view that the outcome would be by moving that item to delay it to consider it. So I thank the General Manager for that advice. That's given me more clarity. I will speak to that particular aspect, and I do agree that user pays is the fairest way. And if people need to want to go the tip, that they have that amount of rubbish and things like that they do pay, and that the impost is not on the community. I raised the issues around FOGO because that was the opposite argument at the time, and that was put on people. So, it's not about that, but it was about understanding how a different argument is applied in this particular time. So, people will think it unusual, but I will be voting for the motion. It was more about the process, and for me as an alderman to be more informed and to do it. So perhaps if the General Manager could take those steps on board when future matters come before us. But yes, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. So I'll put the recommendation to the vote, being at this point we are voting on the alternative motion, being recommendations 1 and 2. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is Alderman Dunsby. Raise your hand if you are against. That is Alderman Bull, Deputy Mayor King, Mayor Thomas, Alderman Richardson, Alderman Fraser and Alderman Hickey, and the motion is lost. We have a foreshadowed motion to revert to the original motion with the 3 recommendations before us, moved by the Deputy Mayor. Do I have someone to second? Alderman Bull, Deputy Mayor, open debate, please.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to thank Alderman Dunsby for bringing the process to us that she's discussed tonight, because it's important that we give everything consideration. I think we've had a good discussion around this. We're pretty clear on where we want to go and where we need to go, and so I'm happy to move forward as we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any further discussion of the item? I did have a few questions, if I may, in relation to not so much on the free waste weekend, but more generally in relation to the report. So page 29 of the report notes that commercial premises can now participate in curbside FOGO collection. I just wondered if and how we are promoting this to businesses. General Manager, or perhaps you want to...
I might throw to either the Director or the Manager. No.
Mayor, thank you for the question. We'll take that on notice. We have got some media, social media and some direct contact with businesses that we'll be undertaking, but we'll probably come back to you with a bit more detail on how that will be progressed.
Excellent. I think it's really important that we actively promote it and use Activity City and other mechanisms that we have. So I ask that we take those existing channels that we have, can we take those into account when we're promoting to businesses? Thank you. And I also wondered, and I know I've asked this question of you before, what about sporting clubs, community houses and other community organisations, and where do they fit in to the tables on pages 30 and 31? So that table outlines the costs for services. So we've got standard services, residential and commercial. And then there's special garbage and special recycling, special FOGO. I just wondered if we, and I know most sporting clubs, I'm not sure about community organisations, have their own private collection, but how are we and can we work with them on, and where, if so, where do they fit in terms of the rates that they're charged?
Mayor, there's not a special consideration of that yet, and it's something we're going to have to build into lease agreements going forward. So we'll have to further develop, we progress.
Yeah. And do you think though it'd be likely residential charges would apply, or commercial, or would they have their own separate category? Don't know.
Once again, not quite sure. Yeah, it depends on the situation, where they're situated. Do they run a bar? So are they classed as commercial operation or not? So we'll have to work out where they sit and factor that into their lease, and then maybe that we have to create a new category in the fees and charges at a future date. Okay.
Or it may be that they have appropriate waste services in place and we don't need to, but I guess we don't have a good handle on that. So
I think, Mayor, that is the case. Some do actually have their own arrangements with some of the waste disposal companies already. Some have their own bins on site, but that's something we'll have to work through to establish, and whether we can set up a consistent charge for all clubs, or whether we look at each one individually, something we, as I said, we still have to work through.
Yeah, I guess my concern is the amount of bottles I see going directly, cans I see going directly into the general waste bin at some of the sporting clubs around the community, because they don't separate their waste and they're not really required to. So it's something, a great potential to reduce the waste to landfill. And do you think the container refund deposit scheme will make a difference there?
Definitely will, Mayor, because that will be a way for them to generate some revenue for the club.
Yep. Thank you. And as per my question in relation to item 9, can we be confident the proposed increases are sufficient to cover the costs of disposing waste? You know, we had the conversation about inflation, and I know it's hard to speculate, as you said, General Manager, but I guess how have we come to these figures, and are we satisfied that it's gonna be enough to cover those increasing costs of doing business?
Thank you, Mayor. We've worked through the actual costs because the services, a lot of the services are based on contracts that we have with the waste disposal companies, recycling companies. So those fee increases have been factored in. So we've actually based that increase on the application of the new waste levy and the increases that the waste disposal companies will be applying to their contracted rates.
Okay. Great, thank you. And one final question. I often get asked why council doesn't have a hard waste collection day, and I explain the cost and also the work health and safety risks. But do we have a list of providers that will collect hard waste for people, like the recovery centre, you know, the tip shop? I think City Mission, Salvos, St Vincent de Paul, some of those services do provide a pickup service if people have hard waste that is able to be repurposed. So do we have an understanding of who those providers are, maybe private providers? And if so, can we promote it on our website so that people know we can direct people to different services?
Thank you, Mayor. We have actually provided a list upon request of a number of service providers that can do hard waste pickup. We don't promote individual companies on our website, but if we're asked who might be able to provide this, we can provide that list on request.
Okay.
I just caution you, Mayor, that recently I had to help someone remove a lot of hard waste, and some of those charities will get there and then not accept goods. So you're still left with taking them to the tip.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. Any further discussion of the item? No? Well, I note the increase of $13 across all 3 waste collections for general residential properties, which ultimately is the cost of waste disposal directly transferred to ratepayers. So council has very little, if any, control over these costs, and if we subsidise the increased costs, then we would only need to charge higher rates to cover this subsidy. So ultimately, the ratepayers need to pay these increased costs, and that's what our contractors are passing on to us as a council. So as I said before, we don't like increasing fees and charges, but unfortunately it's necessary to cover our costs or we go broke. I've already spoken to the free waste weekend in support of abandoning that. So if there's no further discussion of the item, I'll go back to the mover, who was Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to add to the point on the hard waste, as part of the close, we did try this on a number of occasions, council previous years, but it was very small take up in this area. Don't know why, and the cost just exceeded the return to the community. So that's why we didn't continue with hard waste on previous efforts to do so. I'm sure Director Riel would remember that. But I think we've covered this pretty well, and we're covering the cost of doing business. That's what we've got to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'll put the recommendations to the vote, noting we have 3 recommendations before us. Please raise your hand, indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Good work, everyone. On to item 11, Southern Tasmanian Regional Waste Authority. We have a bit of a waste theme running through here. There we go. We have a recommendation that council note that no submissions were received during the public consultation process undertaken as a component of the establishment of the Southern Tasmanian Regional Waste Authority, approve the proposed rules of the Southern Tasmanian Regional Waste Authority as notified in accordance with section 31 of the Local Government Act, and authorise the General Manager to undertake all necessary actions to enable the establishment of the new joint authority in accordance with the Local Government Act 1993, including providing certification to the Director of Local Government that the rules have been made in accordance with the Act. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Alderman Richardson, someone to second. Alderman Fraser. Alderman Richardson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is pretty straightforward. It follows from the process of establishing the joint Southern Tasmania Regional Waste Authority and the decision in February for the GM to progress this. There were no submissions received through the public consultation process, so I'm happy to authorise the GM to undertake the final steps in establishing the new joint authority.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion of the item? No? I again have a couple of questions, if I may. Based on our population, the report tells us Glenorchy City Council will contribute 17% of the cost of the authority, which, if my calculations are correct, based on a budget of $327,000 roughly, which will equate to approximately $56,000 contribution from Glenorchy City Council in the first year. Is that right? And is the cost likely to be the same in future years to council? And will council see savings equal to or more than this contribution, and when? What is the likely payback period? General Manager?
Through you, Mayor, Michael, hear more from the Director of Infrastructure and Works, but my understanding is that we're anticipating that the cost of the joint authority will be met by the new waste levy. We just can't bank on that at this stage because it hasn't come into operation yet.
Bank on it. Good one. Director
Through you,
Renewal?
Mayor, that's correct. Early indications are once it's established that the levy will actually cover the cost of it. And the benefits that we'll be getting is a joint campaign about recycling, reducing waste, similar to what's already in operation on the North West Coast, which has been very successful. And the state government doesn't want to pay the levy back, or the returns on the levy, to individual councils. It wants it to go to a body, hence the reason the joint authority is being established.
Okay. Thank you, Director. Any further discussion of the item?
Just, I guess I'd like to comment that it's, if we can come together, all 12 councils, to form a body such as this, I'm sure we can do more things together to make big savings and possibly start the move down the path towards amalgamation or resource sharing seriously. So I thank the Director for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion? We'll go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson.
Nothing further to add?
I'll put the recommendations to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Item 12 on our agenda is Capital Works Progress Update. And we have a recommendation that Council receive and note the Capital Works Status Summary report for the period ending 30th of April 2022 and receive and note the adjustments to capital estimates documented in the report pursuant to section 82(7) of the Local Government Act 1993. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Alderman Fraser, someone to second. Alderman Richardson. Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, there's a lot going on in this report, and I obviously don't have time to go through it all, but in general, as is noted in the agenda, there's, the environmental changes in particularly around the construction industry have caused the capital works budget to need to be changed around quite significantly. And this is something that's affecting lots of people and councils, and it's industry wide at the moment. The council's not alone in this. It's good to see that we have some established dates for starting some of the projects that our community desperately wants. So we have a start date for the Gibbons Reserve play space, which is great. That's going to commence in the next financial year. Well, it's probably not a date, but it's at least a period that it's going to be starting in. We have the Montrose Bay Foreshore skate park, which is going to begin in July this year. So that's a bit closer to where we are at the moment, which is great. We have the Montrose Bay Foreshore playground, also programmed to occur in June this year. And I did have a question about the council chamber solar panel installation. It's at the moment, well, originally the calculation was that the payback period would be 5 to 6 years, but obviously with the blowout, with the new canopy structure, it's doubled the payback period, and I'm just wondering, well, what's the actual life of solar panels going to be? Is it still worth continuing with it?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. The roof repairs was actually something that had to be done regardless.
Right.
So the roof repairs are because we've got certain areas of the roof that is basically rusted through, so we had to replace those. And where the canopy is going over the air conditioning system, it's because the weight of the plant on the roof has bowed the roof, which makes the water pool, and where the projections that are coming from the air conditioning equipment go through the roof, the water is able to get through there. So that work would have had to have been undertaken anyway, and the delays with the solar panels not due to that work, but because TasNetworks had to conduct a further assessment on the panels, or the whole installation becoming a micro generation facility, which basically means it's a little power station. So their assessment is a bit different from a normal domestic supply.
Another question, if I may, Mayor. How many kilowatt hours of panels kilowatts are you putting on the
For
roof?
you, Mayor, I should have looked that up before I came to the meeting. I have got that, but I don't know off the top.
I wonder what the threshold is to be a micro generator.
Yeah, I don't know that either. But I can send you that information. But, it's obviously much more extensive than the domestic supply. So to get the savings that we're looking at, we've tried to maximise the area on the roof to produce the maximum return on that solar gain.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Anything further?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Hickey.
Mayor, I think for anyone following this debate tonight, and all those who are going to be very crabby because we've taken out free tip fees, free visits to the tip on a waste day, I think we do need to understand that as aldermen, we are really trying to be very responsible about the budget management. This council has had fiscal problems for much longer time than I can remember. I think it goes way back to the first attempt in 2015 for a serious overhaul of the council, and due to all of the dramas that went around that single report and events that followed, basically the council went into shock and didn't proceed with some of those very serious cost-cutting methods that I believe they should have done. But just for example, in this report, we are talking about the capital works budget containing 326 separate expenditure lines, which include council and grant funded projects and capital purchases, totalling $19.654 million to be completed or substantially commenced by June 2022. But as everyone would understand, the environment has gone crazy. You can't get tradesmen. The cost of goods has gone up. Accessing the goods is almost impossible. So there's 26 weeks lead time for play equipment and sports lighting towers. And also the recent floods have had significant impact on when the work can be done. COVID stopped a lot of staff from working and timelines have all blown out. So we have to, as aldermen, be very responsible and be across all of this information and very hefty documents that support these decisions. So I do hope there'll be some tolerance by our ratepayers that we do our very best, and sometimes tough decisions make us quite unpopular. Coming to the stormwater program, I'm a little bit concerned. I meant to ask this question earlier about impacts of flooding that we've seen around the city recently. And I think given the fact that weather seems to be more unpredictable, whether that's due to climate change or otherwise, these 30-year floods, 50-year floods and 75-year floods have almost blown out the window in places like Queensland. So given there could be an act of God and we get another one of these big storms, between CBOS and the council and the state government, those 8 houses that are sitting perched on that very steep hill, are there mitigation strategies to stop them from slipping down should there be a landslide there due to water events? Because I would hate to see anybody with properties underneath there. You know, that's an unmanageable risk.
Through you, Mayor, what I can say is when we had that rain event, that was one side on the list that we sent our engineers to check, to monitor at different periods during the day. And I know our building compliance officers also did checks on that. So it was definitely on the list for safety checks. The longer term, I believe that is being dealt with through a different process on how that's going to be resolved permanently. But in the short term, yes, we are checking on the safety of those structures.
Well, I'm glad to see it's on our risk register, as far as you're concerned, but I urge the state government and council without delay to seriously consider the ramifications, because this is a foreseeable event. You know, it's very, very likely that something will happen up there due to the poor construction. And I don't think it's fair on residents below, even copying the residue, you know, pebbles and waste and all the stuff that comes off that site, let alone be harmed, physically harmed. So if you could speak with your state state government contacts and see that that could be rushed up, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, certainly our building control staff have been in touch with CBOS, with the state government's building control people, so we're keeping a close eye on.
Yes, well, with all due respect, General Manager, I've worked in both levels of government, and I know that one section can talk to the other, and a letter can be written, another letter of confidence can be written, and these delays go on. And what I'm urging is that this is unacceptable in this day and age, and we do need an urgent strategy to prevent any dire consequences happening from that site in particular. End of lecture.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Richardson.
Yeah, I just have a question if I may, through you, Mayor. Solar panels and Prince of Wales drainage works, the shortfall in funding there is going to be met by savings and underspend from the capital works budget. Is that going to create a problem going forward? Are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? Because I know the Windermere boardwalk money is being sacrificed for that.
Through you, Mayor, the Windermere boardwalk money that project was underfunded once the scope was developed, and you know what was required was never going to fit in that funding, so that money was reallocated. The Prince of Wales Bay drainage works and dismantling of Pond C and all the other works that we're doing there is funded through the Cadbury change room and lighting original budget that we had there, which is now grant funded. So a grant was actually received to do that work so that our council funds wouldn't need to be allocated, but there was a shortfall in the total amount. So what we're doing is, if we have savings or underspends across the program, we're reallocating that money to this project. So if we finish a project under budget, we can reallocate that to make sure that we finish another project like Prince of Wales Bay. The Prince of Wales Bay project is also co-funded through an election commitment grant that was received through the Knights Soccer Club, the Glenorchy Knights. So they're actually making a contribution through a government grant. And I guess we took the opportunity to remove Pond C because it's not a facility that's needed anymore. It removes the hazard, a risk, because there's a body of water sitting there, and we can increase the playing surface, which relieves a bit of pressure off our other playing fields. So we actually are going to provide another practice soccer pitch by doing this work.
And the Broadwalk project's still there, we just find funding for it at a later date, is that right?
Yes, so through you, Mayor, we could be looking at doing that through a future capital works program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. I also had some questions, a couple have been answered in relation to the solar panels on council chambers. Alderman Fraser asked a question I had about that, but I also had a question around the $95,000 budget allocation wasn't sufficient for the Windermere Boardwalk project, but I guess how much, what was the required budget, like how much more did we need, and did it exceed the $182,000 the solar panel project has required?
Mayor, yes, it did. It was up around the 300, and because of the other associated works that needed to be done, because they're not funded or planned yet, it sort of slipped down the priority list. And with the solar panels, we can generate a operational saving immediately once the solar panels are up and running. So that's why that became a higher priority to actually complete.
Sure. But as Alderman Richardson said, it's still on the list. It just will require potentially local roads and community infrastructure grant funding or something like that down the future. I just know it's an important area for our community and something that people want to see, that connectivity all the way around to Mona, ultimately.
Yes, Mayor, that's actually a good candidate for one of those programs.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent, thank you. Also in relation to Prince of Wales Sports Ground, Council received $150,000 state government funding, which really was through the advocacy of the Glenorchy Knights Football Club. It wasn't something that we'd identified necessarily as a priority through our sport and rec strategy, and that's blown out. The cost's blown out to almost double at $280,000 due to the contamination of the ground, which was an old landfill site.
Just to clarify, Mayor, we've taken the opportunity to remove Pond C at the same time, so which was something that would have had to have needed to be done down the track sometime. So this actually, because we've got contractors there working to install drainage and to put a new turf on top, it's much cheaper to get the additional work done while they're there on site now. So yeah, we're gaining efficiency through utilising them and killing two birds with one stone by removing the pond, decontaminating and creating an extra playing surface.
Right, okay. I was going to just suggest we're investing a lot in football infrastructure, round ball football infrastructure. I wondered if we'd hit Football Tas or the Knights up for any further contribution, but given it's it's at our discretion to do that extra bit, that probably would be unfair of me to ask that.
It's through Mayor, it's removing a potential risk that we have sitting there. So it seemed to make sense to try and deal with all the issues at the one time.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense, thank you. And so the 280,000 is a capital cost, but really the ongoing depreciation and maintenance costs won't be on that expenditure, because part of it is removal rather than all sort of creating a new asset. Because obviously if we have a new playing surface there, that's going to add an asset to our books, or is it renewal or upgrade? It's upgrade, right?
Yeah, through there, you're right, but in this case, we're actually removing a redundant asset that we have to inspect and monitor and service, because there's a pond with a liner with a valve. So yeah, there is a maintenance obligation there for us, plus that risk with the contamination. So one offsets the other, and playing surface is certainly probably less of a burden for us than what we've actually got sitting there now.
Okay, thank you. And have we appointed a successful tenderer for the Montrose Skate Park project yet?
The tenders, I don't know if they're quite closed yet. Okay.
Yeah, and the Barry Street Reserve, it talks about the playground being upgraded there. I just wondered, how was that particular play space chosen for that $300,000 play space allocation? Is that through our play space strategy?
Yes, Mayor, that's actually a little bit of a error in the heading. It was supposed to be for play spaces in general across the Levy. Barry Street was one of those reserves, but somehow in the setting of the budget and the headings, Barry Street got put as the title of that budget, and it looked like $300,000 was being allocated just to Barry Street. So it was a bit of an error in the way it was worded.
So we're not spending $300,000 at Barry Street; it's going across Montrose Bay as well.
Yes, Mayor, it's going to Montrose Bay softball and the new nest swing.
Yep.
And we'll still be doing a playground at Barry Street as well with that funding.
Yeah.
So it was, like I said, it was a bit of an error that it looked like it was all for Barry Street.
Excellent, thank you. And final question, on page 47, the report talks about our Footpath, Stormwater and Property Management Renewal program. And I know on our website we have a works in progress section and a planned works section. But I just wondered, do we publish the details of all of our programs on that page, on our website regularly, so that our community knows what's coming up when and what's in progress? And if not, can we set up a mechanism to do that?
Thank you, Mayor. Not everything's on that website. As Alderman Hickey said, we've got over 300 line items of projects or purchases. So we try and just focus on the main ones, the major ones, or ones that have a high level of community interest. We are looking at what we can do to improve it. It does come down to resourcing a bit. So at the moment, I haven't got an admin officer who would look after that. So we're looking at recruiting and seeing if we can keep up with the program on the website.
Sure. If you need help with an admin officer, I might be able to lend you mine.
I might have to.
I think I have been actually. All right. Thank you, Director Riali.
Thank you.
Any further discussion of the item? Well, I am very pleased to see this report come to us with an update and providing that transparency and openness to the community on updates on our very important capital projects. It really are the things that make a difference on the ground for our community. I'm pleased to see the landfill extension project progressing and on track to be completed in June, and I was lucky enough to go and have a visit with the project manager last week and have a chat to him about the project and get an understanding of what we're actually doing there. Of course, I'm pleased to have reached agreement with Taswater to jointly fund stage 1 of the Tolosa Dam remediation project, so I think that definitely deserves a special mention at this meeting as well. So we are, as you will have read in the report, we're contributing about half of the required $6.2 roughly $million investment through funding from the local roads and community infrastructure program, and also some of the funds from the sale of the Derwent Entertainment Centre that was set aside for special projects like this. So great to see some progress happening there. And I do note also that we're still awaiting a final decision from Sorrel Council on the BMX track relocation, pending final costings they obtain via a tender process. So really important that we have these updates at council and for our community. If there's no further discussion, I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought I might just conclude by reminding people of the complexity of balancing the council budget, particularly when all new assets that the council creates end up costing 2.5% for maintenance and 2.5% for depreciation. So the $12.5 million that we've received to build the new football facilities, KG5 and Chigrol, will essentially add nearly $600,000 worth of expenses for the council over the next, well, that'll be annually. So it's, it really does, it's great that we have new assets, of course, we need to keep building new assets, but it does come with significant financial costs, ongoing financial costs for the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. That closes debate. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for the recommendations. Alderman Bull, we are still on that same item of capital works updates. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 13, procurement and contracts monthly report. We have a recommendation that council receive and note the procurement contracts monthly report for the period from 15th of April to 17th of May 2022. Do I have a mover for this item? Alderman Bull, seconded Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Bull.
Yes, I'd move that the recommendation be accepted. It is purely for legal fees, and I'll open it for discussion. My fellow Alderman, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Bull. Any further discussion of the item? No, nothing to close debate. Alderman Bull.
Nothing, thank you.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Item 14, financial performance report to 30th of April 2022. The recommendation is that council receive and note the financial performance report for the year to date ending 30th of April 2022 as set out in attachment 1. Do I have a mover for this item? Alderman Richardson, someone to second? Or Alderman Fraser? Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. The favourable to budget position continues with 3.2 million better than budget result per month. 2.9 million increase in revenue and 334,000 decrease in expenditure. We're still 8.6 million of capital works money to be spent in the next couple of months, but it looks like non-grant funding program of works for 21-22 is unlikely to be completed by 30th of June. Is that right? Yeah. So the report's self-explanatory. I don't have any questions, so I'm happy to receive and note the report.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Alderman Fraser.
One glaring variance that I couldn't help but notice was the non-operating contributions of non-monetary assets. We had a budget of 2.1 million, but it's ended up being nearly $12 million in donated assets. And by donated, that's not necessarily a good thing. That's it would be for any other organisation, but not necessarily for the council. I just wondered if we could get some explanation for why that was so different to what was budgeted and what those are made up of.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. General Manager.
The donated assets would largely be from the coming on stream of new subdivisions, but I'll ask the Director just to further explain.
Director.
Thank you, Mayor. General Manager, it's largely a subdivision in the northern suburbs, Whitestone Drive. So because of the size of that subdivision, we've taken over now roads, footpaths, lighting, stormwater assets, and everything else that goes with it. So the value of those donated assets is around the $11 million mark. So the rest of it are some other smaller subdivisions, but majority is that one subdivision.
Which, going by a previous calculation, is equivalent to about an impost of nearly $600,000 a year with maintenance and depreciation. Would that be correct?
Would be rule of thumb, that's correct, because obviously some have higher rates, some have lower rates, some have longer lives, but generally that's about right.
And I wonder, I know we had a conversation with the General Manager on this topic, maybe in a workshop, but I wonder whether the rate revenue that we collect from a new subdivision like that does in fact cover those costs. Would we be collecting $600,000 in rate revenue from Whitestone? Well, I don't think so, anywhere near it, would it?
I doubt it. We'd have to take that on notice.
I think it partly goes to the point where the GAT's lobbying the state government and working with the state government on policy around developer contributions. So some other states have developed contributions for this exact reason, and that's something I think that has partly contributed to the financial sustainability issues that council have over quite a long period of time, because we haven't had developer contributions here.
Yeah, certainly concerning.
Through you, Mayor, technically that's the principle. The theory is that rates should be covering it, but it all depends on how much in that area, the services that are provided, how much maintenance with that particular subdivision. There's a fair bit of natural area reserve around that subdivision, so there's probably additional grounds maintenance, tree maintenance, and those sort of things that needs to be taken into consideration.
Alderman Hickey.
Mayor, I'm very concerned that we might be sending mixed messages to our audience. Because we had a favourable result, that is not good news. It's basically due to a 50% prepayment of an financial assistance grant of 2.034 million, which is 0.755 million higher than expected. Unspent grants carried forward of 0.869 million. And of course, jobs we haven't completed and staff positions we haven't filled. So it is not a, wow, let's go out and party and why are we not giving away free tip passes? The council continues to be on a bad trajectory financially, and this is just a moment in time snapshot. It is not good news.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion? Alderman Fraser?
No.
No. You look like you're poised.
Oh, did I? No.
If there's no further discussion, I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson, to close debate.
So I'm happy to go to the vote.
You go to the vote, put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Item 15, final item on our open agenda this evening is notices of motion, questions without notice or notices of motion. Any alderman have any this evening? Alderman Dunsby.
Yeah, at the April meeting, I asked questions about the volunteer awards process and requested a report back to this meeting. Although aldermen are now aware of the process, will the report be forthcoming at the next meeting to inform the public of the outcome?
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. General Manager or Director?
Yes, we'll bring a report back to the next meeting. We can provide a verbal update for the public record now. So I'll invite the Director to come forward.
You sure you don't want to? Through you, Mayor. Thank you for the, apologies. Thank you for the question. Alderman Dunsby, thank you. The Glenorchy Volunteer Awards process is rolling out in June, and I just don't have the date on me at the moment. Alderman Dunsby.
15th, I think it is.
Yep. 15th, and certainly we can bring back a formal report to council to document that. As Alderman would be aware, we also recognised during Volunteer Week during May this month the 20 years of volunteer contribution the Claremont Volunteer Library volunteers have been putting in for the last 20 years. It was a celebration during Volunteer Week to recognise those 20-year volunteers. And the normal volunteer awards will go ahead, as the Mayor just outlined, on the 15th of June.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions without notice? Oh, sorry, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. So public attendance at council meetings. So I've submitted a request to seek an answer to the question. I'm still awaiting the reply. So I'm just asking to hear for the answer to be on the public record. So the question is, why is there a registration process still required for council meetings when the density limits have now been lifted by the state government?
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, my understanding, I just might check with the Executive Officer, but my understanding is that we still have something on our website, but we're intending to remove that from the website so that it removes that registration requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager. Any for Alderman Hickey?
Yes, Mayor. I believe there's an election coming up very soon, and I think it's becoming more obvious that there's more and more questions being asked that possibly could be asked during the day that don't have a lot of strategic value. But I'd like to suggest that if anyone is interested in joining the council and contributing to the future direction of this city, that they should seriously consider making inquiries of other aldermen or looking on the website of the Local Government Association to find out how they may put their hand up and become an alderman of this great city.
So what's your question, Alderman Hickey?
Is there an election coming up?
The answer is yes, as you well know. There is an election coming up
in 5 months' time.
September, I believe the notice of election will be issued around the 4th of September and polling will close on the 25th of October. So yes, you are right. And I encourage any community members considering running to talk to myself or anyone to, as Alderman Hickey said, be part of this wonderful team that we have here at Council to run our wonderful city. Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further questions without notice? Well, that brings our open council meeting to an end at 7:57 p.m. Do I have someone to move that we go to close council? Alderman Ball, someone to second. Alderman Fraser, put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Sorry, yes, 7:57 p.m. Our open part. All members of the public for attending, Mr. Ayres, Ms. McDonald and Mr. Steenbergen. Thank you for being here this evening and we'll see you hopefully again sometime.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Nice to have an audience.
And we'll see you next time.